getting into the part that gets confusing. Yes?
It's not really important that he wandered all over there on the camel caravans, working for his wife or something.
Well, I think, you know, that's one of the things that says to us, he was, the question was, of what importance was it that Muhammad's career during much of this time when he was receiving these revelations was as a trader with the camel caravans of his father-in-law. You know, it's not an essential thing, but it suggests to us that he was fairly widely traveled and wasn't just, you know, the boy from the backwoods town that didn't know nothing about nothing. He was exposed to the wider world.
He also had time to develop an internal life, which allowed him to contemplate a deity, or think about a deity. That's would be what I'm hearing.
And I think that's not far wrong. There are those who would argue it's not an accident that most of the great revelations that have come down through the course of history come from folks who've spent significant time out in the desert or the wilderness. You know, where did Moses spend years of his life?
Desert.
In the desert, tending the sheep of his father-in-law, Jethro. Most of the prophets had significant periods in their life where they were out away from the hubbub of everyday life, thinking deep thoughts. You know, Jesus withdrew into the wilderness to contemplate, not only to begin his ministry, but with great regularity through his ministry. If you read the Gospels, often he goes off into the wilderness, the desert, the quiet places to pray. So you know, I think that's a helpful insight, that it is often when we are removed from all of the fast pace and busyness of everyday life that you know, there's an opening for God to connect with us. I often feel like, you know, it's amazing to me, sometimes I read the writings of even some of our almost contemporaries. A lot of people who were barely literate immigrants 150 years ago, who spent most of their days pushing a plow. And their interior life and their thoughtfulness about what is life all about far surpasses what we find in most cases in this day and age. So, Dee, I think that is, you know, that is an important observation. He was a man who had time to listen for the voice of God. Jerry.
The other side of that caravan story were two things. One, he was orphaned at a very young age, and which a lot of scholars believe was the reason why he had a great sympathy and empathy for those who are in bad shape. But the caravan aspect was he was also a highly skilled trader, and his ability to which is in fact why he worked for his future wife-in-law. She picked him as her husband because he was a highly skilled trader, which helped him both in Yathrib, because he helped them unify their town, and they looked to him for advice. So I think he got an awful lot out of his caravan.
He was a very wise person and a very skilled negotiator, and a good judge of character and also of the art of the deal.
Yeah.
When does it make sense to push for more? And when does it make sense to back off? You know, I didn't want to go into all the details of his career as he kind of rose to power in Medina and returned to Mecca. But, you know, there are years of struggle and many battles and you know, the rise and fall of people's fortunes and, you know, who's going to win. You look back with the benefit of hindsight and, well, you know, this is the way it happened. It was ordained that it was to be. But I'm sure that there were many times in the midst of that process when it seemed to the people who were living it a very open-ended thing. Who's going to prevail? Who's going to prevail? And that shapes also the flavor of a lot of the material in the Quran, because it's about an an encouragement to be faithful, to persevere, to hang on in the midst of things not seeming to go your way, because if you are on the right path, then God is on your side and you will prevail in the end. And I think a lot of that came out of that experience of the back and forth of, you know, one day you're up, the next day you're down. Well, we won a great victory this month, but, you know, next month didn't go so well. And that went on for years.
Well, that's the very point I was wondering about. There were victories, and they were military victories. He used the military aspect of his group to conquer places.
Right from the beginning, that was an aspect even of Muhammad's leadership of this growing Muslim community. They were very conflicted about that. If you read the accounts, under what circumstances is it appropriate to fight? With whom may we fight? And one of the things about that was a game changer for the people of his era is that up until that time, loyalties were tribal. You fought for the honor of your tribe. It was perfectly all right to slaughter folks who belonged to another tribe, but heaven help you if you didn't deal forthrightly and properly with your own in-group. And one of the things that the early Muslim community wrestled with was, well, which is more important in choosing allegiances? Our tribe or our faith? And in that sense, it was the kind of thing that echoed what was going on often in the period of early Christendom, because one of the things that, as the book of Acts says, turned the world upside down when the message of Christ began to spread, was this idea that in Christ we are all brothers and sisters. We're bound together by our faith, and that supersedes all of these other loyalties by which our communities have defined us. There's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free, etc., etc. Well, that kind of ethos of we are bound together in a faith community, and that supersedes all those other attachments, that was a very important part of what was going on in the development of that Islamic community in those early years.